Greetings and welcome to the inaugural podcast from the U.S. Embassy. This is our Khotla Talks, where we will be hosting. Sometimes it'll be me, other times it will be other folks from the embassy, with people who have something to say about Botswana, about the United States, and about our relationship. Of course, this is an important year for the United States and for Botswana. This is July 4th will mark the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence. And of course, at the end of September, Botswana will celebrate its 60th year of independence. So this is a really important year for both of us, and we're delighted to celebrate it today. I am particularly delighted to be here, joined by my friend, Dr. Ramsay, who is well known in Botswana, and as a real scholar, and as someone who has taken some time to study on Botswana and learn a bit about the history. I'm very familiar with much of Dr. Ramsay's work. I'm also a regular listener to his radio show, where he covers many aspects of Botswana's history in a way that is entertaining and informative, and something I look forward to every Tuesday. So welcome, Dr. Ramsay.
My
Delighted
pleasure.
to be here with you.
Nice to be here.
Terrific. So I have a hard time because of your accent thinking of you as a Botswana, but you are absolutely, definitely a Botswana, even though you sound a lot like me and a lot of other Americans. Tell me, Dr. Ramsay, how did you end up being here in Botswana? Can you give us a short history?
The shortest history is that, what anchored me, let me first say that I did come to Southern Africa all the way back in 1976, and I'd had an interest in Africa. And I was in an African Studies program in graduate school. So coming to the region wasn't a big issue per se, in the sense that I was already on that track. However, I met my wife while I was a graduate student, and she is a Botswana.
Great.
And we did come here together in 1984. And once we got here, we decided that essentially we would stay. It wasn't an immediate thing, but we had to make that decision. We even went back to the United States for 2 years while I finished up my doctorate. She did her master's degree. But we decided in 1990 that we were definitely coming back and making this our home.
Terrific.
So it's a matter of you've got to be in one place or the other and put down your stakes, so
That's
to
right.
speak.
That's right. And I know that you had children after you returned here.
We did indeed.
And it strikes me that where they plant your roots is where you're gonna call home.
Yeah, no, well, the irony is all three of them at the moment are in the States.
I remember that. But hopefully only temporarily they'll return to their home here.
Yeah, well, we'll see, hopefully.
Great. Well, listen, since this is a Khotla talk, we wanted to talk a little bit about U.S.-Botswana relations. I mean, can you reflect on where our relations have been in the past and where we're at now?
Well, there's two levels to it. I mean, if we go to people relations, we can actually dig back into the 1800s. There were missionaries here.
In the 1800s, there were American missionaries in
Botswana? They didn't stay, but they did pass through. They were chased out by the Matabele.
Uh-huh.
But there was an African-American, an ex-slave here during the time of Livingston. In fact, he was a partner with Livingston named George Fleming. But more, if you were to say, when did Botswana first meet Americans, it would have been in the Second World War, when Botswana did fight side by side with Americans in the American Fifth Army in Italy. And in terms of political relationship, well, Governor Soapy, we call him Soapy Williams, George Menon Williams, he is the ex-governor of Michigan and the first assistant Secretary of State for Africa. He came here in 1961, 1961. He met with all the political leaders, including Seretse Khama and his wife, and was quite interested. I've looked at his reports. At that point, the United States was looking at the future of the High Commission territories as they were at the time, and whether they'd be standing on their own feet in the shadow of the apartheid regime. And so from there, I think it's fair to say that the United States began its political relationship. At independence, the United States was, of course, represented by the governor of Hawaii, as it turns out, but was there to be, in queue for diplomatic, diplomatic relations from the very beginning. So from that time, the relationship has only grown in terms of a variety of partnerships.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I like to focus on, when I think about the United States and Botswana, I'm struck by the number of similarities that our two countries share, both in, sort of political, characteristics, some of the values that we hold dearly, and but also some differences,
Yeah.
some places where there are, just in terms of our society, in terms of, the way that we interact. I'm always impressed by those things in Botswana that I would love to see transplanted to the United States. And I'm talking about things like the concept of boto, which I think we don't really have in the United States, but it's the idea that we all are part of one bigger good,
Yes.
and that what happens to you impacts me. And I just think that that's a real strength of Botswana. Could you talk a little bit about those kinds of similarities and differences between our two cultures?
Well, I think Ubuntu is a real thing, and we want to cling to it here. If America had Ubuntu, I'd be hard to say that it's still displaying that at the moment. Though certainly I think at community level you could find that historically in the United States. One thing that's definitely unites us and I think differentiates us from most societies is this strong belief in basically freedom of expression. The United States has its First Amendment. The Kotla tradition of Botswana, which says that any fool should be allowed to speak, putting it into English, again shows that yes, and that's not only in theory and in the law, but it's in genuine practice here. So as we can see around the world, that is not necessarily the norm in other societies, even in our own region. So definitely that's one thing that unites Botswana and Americans.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I always think of it as almost, there are some traditions in the United States of like town meetings. My wife is from Vermont. In Vermont, there's a tradition where every town has a meeting every year, and anybody can say anything they want. And that's a little, reminiscent of what we find here in Botswana. I think the Botswana model, because it meets more regularly and it's a bit more organized, I think has some distinct advantages. But it is a similarity, and it's one that I really respect about Botswana. But I think that you touched on a little bit of this when you mentioned freedom of expression, and everyone has a right to speak their mind, and I think in the United States and here in Botswana, there's a respect for that. I mean, there's an appreciation that we can say what we think, and no one should be offended, and that's a really defining freedom for our two countries. A lot of other places in the world don't have that. So I thought that was very interesting. So tell me, you mentioned about the founding of Botswana. It was a much different place at independence, for sure. And I always like to think that the United States has been a partner, has been a reliable friend of Botswana. Is that really the case?
I think in general, where there have been differences, they've been on the more macro multilateral level in terms of foreign relations. But even when there's been differences over perceptions, for example, during the liberation struggle, there was a great deal of common ground. The United States did take a special interest in Botswana and its sovereignty vis-a-vis the South African regime. One story that I didn't know at the time, but I learned when I was inside government, is when there was the June 14 raid on Gaborone. Not only did the American ambassador in Pretoria get withdrawn, which I did know about, but what I did know is that there was an American general, what the equivalent of AFRICOM, I don't know if it was AFRICOM at the time, was put in Gaborone, I'm told. And that was not something that we knew, but obviously it was a signal to people in Pretoria. So there were subtle ways in which America supported Botswana, as well as more overt ways in terms of the assistance. One of the ways that was quite clear at independence was that Botswana was in the middle of a drought, and there was a great deal of U.S. food aid. And so many Botswana of my generation will remember, the maize meal and the likes with the U.S.
Yeah, I
labels
can't remember
on
what
it.
it's called, but I've heard many people say to me, "Oh, I remember, during the drought we ate," and I don't remember what it was
They
called.
even remember the issues that some people were suspicious because some of the original maize meal was yellow rather than white, and they were wondering if that was of any good. And of course, it's just, but because of that, of course, then they ended up sending white maize meal.
Interesting, very interesting.
Yeah.
The raid that you mentioned, that was in
1985. I remember it very well. It was
Yeah.
in my neighborhood.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting aspect of Botswana history that I think is lost on many Americans. I don't know why, given some of the very exciting, some of the very consequential activities that happen here in Botswana, there haven't been a movie made of some of this. I mean, it strikes me that it lends itself very easily to, sort of a Hollywood interpretation, and I would love to see something like that. I know that you're a very prolific writer. I would hope maybe you could write something that would invite, that kind of a treatment.
I think there's a number of scripts that could appeal to
No
Americans.
question.
I mean, one thing we also have is, although somewhat different, but of course, America has a long, issues of race relations, and
Sure.
some race relations issues have played out in Botswana.
Right.
There is, of course, the famous situation of Seretse and Lady Kama,
Which has lent itself well to Hollywood. if I'm not mistaken.
could be done better by Hollywood,
Yeah.
I think. There was the flogging of Phineas McIntosh in the 1930s. So there are stories from here, definitely. If I had the money, I would make a World War II movie just so I could get the Botswana storming Salerno.
The fighting Becks.
Yeah.
No, that's really
Which would also to give Americans a way of saying, look, yes, here you are in World War II, and here's everybody else with you
Yeah.
in World War II.
No, it's a striking history, and it was a shared struggle. There's no question about it.
We've been in a global world for a while now.
We are all connected, and I just find so many aspects of Botswana culture and society and history just fascinating, just fascinating. But let me go back. If I can just ask, can you pick out just a couple of milestones in our shared history? I can look at a few things that I think were really important, but I'm curious from your perspective as a Motswana.
Well, I've already mentioned the governor, Williams, coming here. I think our first ambassador to America and the UN is another very important thing. And I vaguely recall when I was very, very small that an older brother of a friend had seen this ambassador, who happened to be Z.K. Matthews, who was a giant figure in Southern Africa, and at the time well known in America. That cemented a certain relationship. I also do remember myself that even though I was young, I remember reading about Botswana's independence.
No kidding.
And indeed, when I was in junior high, I wrote an op-ed for the Baltimore Sun newspaper, and it was about democracy. I was arguing against the guy who basically said democracy is a Western European thing. This was in the context of the Helsinki Accords. And I said, no, it's more universal. And I did cite Botswana. Sometimes I do think it might have been destiny for me to come here because I'm certainly the only one in my high school that was thinking Botswana's democracy.
Fascinating.
Of course, after independence, the Peace Corps were very prominent in this country. And they were prominent both not only as teachers and aid givers, but setting the style. Sometimes there were criticisms of them because they were coming in from America of the 60s, 70s with a different type of culture. But also they certainly pushed things like softball and other cultural issues. So there was that cultural exchange. At the same time, there was some investment and the likes.
The United States has been very supportive of diamonds as the largest consumer of gemstone diamonds in the world. I think still more than 50% of the diamonds are sold in the United States. So that's an interesting point of of our relationship. If I had to point to something else that I think was really important in our relationship, Dr. Ramsay, I would have to point to our collaboration on health issues, and particularly with HIV and AIDS.
Yeah.
And when President Mogai went to the UN and gave that very famous speech, when he underscored the threat that faced Botswana. And the United States, I think in large measure, because of leadership like President Mogai, responded with the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief. I think that while the United States didn't necessarily solve the problem, it helped to provide the tools to Botswana to solve the problem on its own.
Well, I can
Would you agree with
yeah,
that
no,
assessment?
absolutely. I can confirm that during the time of the George W. Bush administration, we had very good relations with the American government. And that was because, first, there was the great support for the HIV/AIDS initiative, and the PEPFAR and those things. Of course, there was a lot coming from the private sector in America through Gates Foundation and others. And certainly we knew that America was supporting the wider international effort in that respect. At the time, President Mogai, I would say, he was not simply our president, though he was, but he was often acting on behalf of wider African interests. And that included when he would go to the United States, he would speak not just for Botswana, but for Africa.
You know, one thing that I always try to point out to people in Botswana when we talk about our relationship is it really is a true collaboration, and health is an interesting place because when, let's say, the President's emergency program for AIDS relief began, Botswana was it was an outlier, both in terms of the severity of the crisis that it faced, but also in its leadership's willingness to engage in a really important way. And it did things not as an experiment, but it did things that it had to do that I think the United States was able to learn from and to then propagate elsewhere in the world. That's something that I don't think a lot of people here in Botswana fully appreciate, is that we do have a collaboration, and that's been a meaningful and fruitful relationship both for the United States and for Botswana. I see that as it pertains to other programs. I'm thinking about like Peace Corps, for example, or Fulbright relations, some of the cultural exchanges. Have you had much experience with these kinds of things?
Well, in the case of Fulbright, I came here on a Fulbright.
Is that right?
Yeah, but in 1984. And of course, I've known plenty of people who've gone the other way.
Yeah, sure.
And it is those people to people, and you never know how far a little thing like that will go. Somebody goes to Botswana and they may never return, and then somebody like me might stick around. But yes, I think as important as government-to-government relations are, it has been the people-to-people relations over time. And there's some ones that are forgotten, like I had said the governor of Hawaii actually represented the United States at independence, and there was a reason for that. Hawaii used to have Botswana clubs, and the Botswana clubs came because they had figured that if you drilled a hole from Hawaii through the globe, you'd come out in Botswana.
Is that right?
And so that's why for a while there was this big interest in Botswana in Hawaii, or at least some interest.
No kidding.
Which is why Machiepe actually went there, and a whole bunch of other things. There was these bilateral relationships between Honolulu and Botswana in the 60s.
And on the face of it, I can't think of two more different places
Yes,
in the world.
indeed.
You know? That's fascinating. I've often said that those kinds of relationships, those very organic and person-to-person kind of diplomacy, they create the most lasting impact, and they certainly make my job as the ambassador a lot easier. Of course, we've had a very engaged Peace Corps presence here in
Absolutely.
Botswana. It hasn't been uninterrupted since the 60s because Peace Corps actually withdrew in the 90s and then came back at the invitation of the
Well, I
government.
remember when it came back because I was in the administration then, and it came back in the context of course, fighting HIV/AIDS.
Sure.
And in that respect, it again was they were very much welcome to return,
Of course, yeah.
and played a key role, as did different institutions like Penn and Harvard and Baylor.
Yeah.
And
No, we, as I say, my job is made so much easier because we have all of these sort of retail level ambassadors who are Peace Corps volunteers, or as I like to refer to them, there's an ecosystem of Big Five universities who have a real presence here, and it's a presence largely independent of the U.S. government. But we're talking about University of Pennsylvania, Harvard University. I think you're a Penn graduate.
I am indeed.
and I'm a graduate of Harvard as well. But in addition addition to that, Baylor, Rutgers, University of Maryland. These are some of the finest institutions in the United States, and they have invested here because it makes sense for them to do so. Many of them bring their students over here, and then they bring other students from Botswana into the United States.
Yeah, not only are we a safe environment, but we're a place which, I mean, this has been true of our partnerships around the world. I talked to Masiri quite a bit about this. Right from the early 70s, we were able to attract assistance not only from the United States, but many other countries. Because if loans, soft loans or grants and aid were given to us, the projects that they were there to finance would happen.
Yeah.
There was the delivery. And so it was the same thing with HIV/AIDS. Not only did we raise the issue, but the money went to those programs. That's how we were able to, get ARVs to everybody and also reduce the mother-to-child transmission in the process and meet the targets that we had set with our partners.
That's right. Yeah. No, it's an astonishing story of accomplishment that only comes about because of hard work and dedication and, frankly, inspired leadership. I mean, the fact that Botswana is among the most accomplished in addressing its HIV issue, and will, I think, soon graduate from PEPFAR, is a testament to the leadership, to the hard work that people have invested in this.
Yeah, and we'd like to believe we have built capacity on both sides. During the COVID-19 crisis, the fact that we were able to find this Omicron virus in the region, early detection, I think is an outcome of the health infrastructure that we put in place.
No question about it. No question about it. I mean, you mentioned Masiri, and I'm struck. I mean, one of the best books that I've read in a long time is his autobiography. And while I don't usually like to read autobiographies because they tend to be slanted, it reads like a movie script. And he drops just enough names and just enough anecdotes to make it really, really interesting. And again, I mentioned this earlier. Why isn't there a Hollywood movie talked about it? And this is a guy who did almost everything. He was an incredible farmer, a real leader, somebody who I think it's fair, nothing came easy to him. He got it by hard work. And then he was in an airplane that got shot down. I mean, it's amazing.
Well,
it's
amazing. He truly is my hero. I really feel fortunate to have had a relationship with him. There's another book coming. It should be out next year, and I think it'll be even more Hollywood than his first memoirs. He'll drop a lot more names and a lot more issues. He finished it just before he passed away, but the book has been delayed a bit, but it's now coming out. But yes, we've been lucky, and here again, you could say that's one thing we had in common with the United States, or the two countries have in common, the first generation of leadership. I mean, I think it's, you can find, faults here and there, but the founding fathers of America and mothers, certainly the first presidents were a series of excellent leaders who established the democracy and the checks and balances of the American system, created that. And here in Botswana, we've had Seretse Khama, we've had Masiri, we've had Mohai, we've had, and I would say the other ones have come since. They've fulfilled, they've been within the norms set by the initial leadership.
Yeah. No, I subscribe to the understanding that countries rise and fall on the strength of their leadership. You look at a place like Botswana, which aside from diamonds, frankly, at its independence, wasn't bestowed with anything, and it had enormous odds, surrounded by racist, tyrannical regimes that were out to frustrate its ambitions, and yet it succeeded against all odds and became an incredible example. Why? I don't think it was because of diamonds. It was because of the leadership that it had. It's inspiring, and I can't help but see the hand of God in that.
Well, yeah, and I think that leadership thing is all the more true when you're just starting a country.
Definitely.
Definitely George Washington has set the precedent with his 2 terms, his reluctance, his backing of a checks and balance constitution, not going for the military option, etc. And Seretse Khama was the same way. He could have had a one-party state. He could have been a dictator. He could have been whatever he wanted. But what he did was who he was. And then again, though, I do believe that is true to the norms of Botswana society. That Butu we talked about, and the traditions of the Kotla. And one of the remarkable things about him that was carried on with Masiri, and they two were really partners at the beginning, was this idea, which they called it Kaisanyo, of course, but the idea that
Consultation?
well, Kaisanyo is mutual. I would call it social harmony.
Oh, I'm thinking of Teresanyo.
But but then there's Teresanyo. Within it, there's Teresanyo. There's Puso ke Puso Kabato, which is government of the people, by the people, for the people. But all of these, it was about translating what are actually traditional Setswana norms, marrying them to the new democratic constitution, the parliamentary type of democratic constitution, and showing that, yes, democracy is not new to the societies. So in that way, we would say that we have an indigenous democracy, and having kept this democracy since 1965, we're also a very mature democracy, in my view.
Sure. There's a real focus in Botswana these days on economic diversification and economic development. I think there's a recognition that what has gotten Botswana to where it's at now is an upper middle income country from independence, when it was, I think, the third poorest country in the world by some economic measures. But what's gotten it to where it's at now is not going to get it where it goes next. You know, where do you see opportunity in Botswana? And I know that you're not an economist, but you're a wise historian.
Yeah, be that as it may. First of all, of course, this notion of diversifying is not new. The problem we have had, in my view, is that since independence, the state has had to take the initiative. And in the process, the state has become all-encompassing. And as much as we've had the commitment to diversification, we have found any number of reasons to not fully commit ourselves to opening our economy, to globalize, to really push for export-led growth. At the same time, I think it's not just a matter of our internal policy. We also need to do much better in our region. This is a discussion we've had with our neighbors for a very long time. And, you know, SACO is supposed to be a customs union, but it is not functioning as a fully fledged customs union in my personal view. We should be seeing ourselves here in Botswana as not a Botswana market, but as at the very least a SACO market, if not a wider SADC, East Africa market. And this is something that was very near and dear, I might say, to both Masiri and certainly to Mahai. But trying to get across the threshold, trying to get both the region to come together and to get our own society focused on the fact that the state can't do everything forever. These are the challenges that we have. Now, the one thing about it is now that we're in more of a crisis, because now it's clear what some of us have known all along, diamonds are not forever. Hopefully crisis will lead to us to rise again, just as the past crisis. You could say at independence we were in a crisis.
Sure.
We had not only dropped, but as you said, we were surrounded by the apartheid regime and the racist Smith regime. And those challenges and this is something that's recurrent in Botswana history, as it is in many nations. When countries are under challenge, they rise to the occasion. So hopefully we'll do the same here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the United States is a fan of Botswana, and we don't take sides in terms of political arguments. And we look for areas that we can work together on shared goals. And certainly, Botswana becoming a diversified economy, a prosperous economy, is a goal that the United States shares.
Yeah. Well, areas, obviously minerals and tourism are two areas, and there is some American investment already in those areas, and a lot more that possibility. Services, and one thing about Botswana is we are very well integrated into the global economy when it comes to issues like ICT readiness. While we have bottlenecks within the government programs, which hopefully are being addressed now, overall, Botswana people are very much digitally literate people. And so, we are ready for business. Yeah. Of course, English is the second language here, but it's a language that is widely spoken. It's a language of education and the like. So, and if you need a base in Southern Africa, particularly in the SACO region, why not look at Botswana?
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I think that there are many selling points with Botswana. You alluded to some of the history, and that this is not the diversification of the economy is not a new, sort of idea here. And I've read a number of books by David Makong, Makong, I was reading one, and he was talking about, he gave a history of the financial assistance program, which very closely resembles some of the loan schemes that are in place now. And as I was reading, and it was talking about the goals and some of the problems, I thought to myself, my goodness, we're reliving this history right now, and this is a program that was 20 or 30 years old. So I'm hopeful that, and I'm optimistic that Botswana will find a way through. I think that there's a lot of opportunity here in Botswana. You mentioned integration regionally, and I think that Botswana has a really key role to play that would help not only Botswana but also the countries of the region. I mean, with the kind of governance and oversight that you've seen, I mean, a fully convertible currency, I don't see any reason that this can't become for financial services, for example. You've got a really well-managed stock market that's, for a country of 2.8 million people, has a third largest capitalization on the continent already. And I don't see why that can't be a kind of a Dubai or a Singapore model.
What we haven't mentioned, but of course we have this well-earned reputation for being low corruption.
Sure.
And while there is there's no such thing as a non-corrupt country, definitely laws are enforced here, and that's certainly true of the financial sector. Otherwise, our region, to take it back, in 1990, as Namibia was becoming independent and as Nelson Mandela was coming out, a lot of us were sitting around at this point in Boston as Southern Africans. I was with them. We had it was just like a seminar, sort of. And we were very optimistic that now that white minority rule has gone away, this region will become, the next bunch of tigers in the global economy. We haven't completely filled that. I think things have gone when I look at South Africa, I think, there's been an enormous amount of progress. Nonetheless, we could do a lot more in terms of regional cooperation.
Sure.
And with that regional cooperation, we could also be in a much better market and partner with the United States and other countries. I'd love to see an American SACU trade agreement.
I would still like to see Botswana become the electricity generation station for the region,
and that's possible.
I was absolutely thrilled when Ra early in this administration sort of sketched out a concept plan to generate, I think, 8 or 9 gigawatts of generation capacity for Botswana, primarily through solar, and I think that would take advantage of another blessing that Botswana has been endowed with
through solar, but even through clean coal, as clean as coal can be. We have had these discussions in the region. We haven't completely fulfilled it, but we had these discussions in the past with South Africa. Why shouldn't South Africa send its coal to China or other markets instead of generating its electricity, and allow us, through the Mamabula project and the likes, generate or use our coal for the generation? There's these types of win-win situations in the region which would achieve that. And it's a crying shame, to be honest, that both countries have had these energy shortfalls, which are a matter of internal issues and not a matter of the inherent resources in the countries.
Absolutely. And why does the United States care about this? Because when Botswana is strong, when Botswana is stable, when Botswana is prosperous, it's a better trading partner. It's a better security partner. It's a better partner in democracy for places like the United States, and because we share so many founding values. Principles. I think it's definitely in our interest to see Botswana thriving. I'm going to go back to some of the things that we were talking about earlier, Professor Ramsay. One is, I know that you're a Botswana. One of the things that I find sometimes confusing in your radio broadcasts is that you'll say, well, this happened and then we did this. And when I hear you say we, I think, oh, it's an American. Wait a minute, he's not speaking as American. He's speaking of Botswana. But there must be one American tradition that you keep alive.
Well, I'm very mindful of American holidays, even though they're not celebrated here, particularly the 4th of July and Thanksgiving. I do usually have turkey at Christmas. That's not really a Botswana thing. But I was just wondering, what are American traditions? One thing now is that, because we are in this global society, because America itself is such a global phenomenon in terms of its own cultural exports, you don't necessarily feel, you only feel like, okay, when you go to America, it's like, oh, yeah, okay, this is different.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you feel like you're in the shadow of America anyway.
Sure.
But yeah, otherwise, I think, there's no doubt that you have it, it's not proper to call it DNA, but where you were born shapes you.
Definitely.
So certainly it has shaped me.
Very good. Very good. That's great. Let me ask you one final question, if I can. If you could think of one aspect of Botswana life or society or culture that you would want to transport to the United States and somehow graft into the United States, what might that be?
Well, we've already talked about it. America, it could relearn tolerance, perhaps. Certainly we have a lot of tolerance here. I would like to believe there's still tolerance in the United States. But when you listen to things right at the moment, you wonder, And so, yes, the one thing that we have here is it's just wonderful. You can walk the streets. Everybody is just good about it. Again, possibly in race relations. I mean, what I would say is that it would be wonderful for more Americans to come to Botswana and see for themselves, and see for themselves what they think could be exported.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I've always said that the two surefire ways that you can get someone to like the United States and appreciate the United States, one is to teach them English, and the second is to send them to the United States. And I think it's probably similar for Botswana. I mean, I think that Americans sometimes have a misperception about what Botswana means, and they don't appreciate the richness and the sophistication and the sort of civilization of the society here in a way that I think is true. And you mentioned something about things that can echo back to the United States.
We've got beef, and I think that's something that we can learn from each other in terms of organic farming, processing, and the likes. So agriculture more generally is very much an open area, and that's where one place, of course, America has a great deal of advantages in terms of the commercialization of agriculture that I think we could truly learn from.
Great.
Yeah.
Good. Well, Dr. Ramsay, I want to thank you for being our inaugural guest here on Kotla, on the American Kotla, and I want to welcome you back whenever you get the chance. It's been a delight to talk with you. I always find it interesting, and to talk with you. And I think between now and next time we talk, I'm going to try to do some more reading and think through some of the things that we've talked about.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Doctor. Great to see you.